quick rewind for those of you who just came in. We're talking about our Arizona Incorporated geospatial professionals into their organization. This is kind of net right here. They're incorporated as professional level members. They've got full voting rights, privileges as registrants in the organization. That happened in 2006. This guy, even this gentleman here, Jack Dangerman, the year we did that, I gave him one of these pins. These are getting to be collector's items now, I'd like to think. At any rate, his thing is always people get the point. So Arizona surveyors get the point. Gave him a little framed button. And if you get the opportunity to go in his office, there's a lot of things on his walls, but this is one of them, this particular one. It's, again, an effort, a conscious effort, an ongoing effort to include geospatial professionals in our activities. And Jack said this, let's see, these two goals are separate, and sometimes they run into a big conflict as to who should do what. But he says, I think it'd be technically directing them, and those technologies can be synergistic. And that's exactly where we are on this. We feed each other, we complement each other. We don't go arguing. I'm going to talk a little bit about defining boundaries. There has to be this notion there, of course, as surveyors, we have certain responsibilities in statute. Those remain, and just again, where those boundaries may be. This is the membership application for geospatial professionals. We talk about experience in responsible charge, much as we do for surveyors as well. To be registered, you have to have proof of responsible charge. That certainly comes into play for the geospatial professionals as well. Have you had management positions? Have you been in, not quite, well, authoritative to the extent that it defines skill, expertise in doing geospatial analysis. This is a recent, this was year 2008 for the 2007 Geospatial Professional of the Year. This is one of our members, Tim Smothers, who's the GIS manager for the city of Peoria, Arizona. Again, active participant, and he is in the Arizona, a board member of the Arizona Geographic Information Council. He assists us in a lot of things, including legislation. This is some of the back and forth we get in this. So let's talk about now this intersection of two professionals. We're going to focus on the parts that we have complemented one another in joint participation efforts. This state's GIS overview authority, if you will. It has recently been legislated into permanent status. We'll talk about that. But the Arizona Geographic Information Council, AG, been in existence since the 80s, and almost all of that time, professional land surveyors have been represented on that executive board. So they've been a part of this process, and sometimes on an ad hoc basis, but been involved for 20-some years. In 2008, AGIC endorsed our one of the products of the geospatial chapter. It's something called the Spatial Data Accuracy and Georeferencing Standards. If any of you have gone to presentations at this conference by Michael Dennis, who is a top-notch surveyor, geodesist, he primarily authored this within the Geospatial Committee and became the chapter. It's a good document. If you have a chance to grab it either at our website, azpls.org, or the state, the AGIC website, agic.az.gov. When it's not exciting reading, perhaps I think it's very informative reading, because it talks about standards in a way that defines standards, but also explains them as well, and then makes application to not just control surveys, or boundary surveys necessarily, but practical things like infrastructure surveys, or just setting aerial control. It serves as the exhibits. I'm talking about the appendices now. Those serve as copy and paste into municipal or agency RFPs to get those services. And so far, fellows like Tim Smothers have elected to include those standards as part of the specifications documents for RFPs. So APLS came up with, the Geospatial Committee came up with, the Geospatial Committee at the time, submitted them to the State Geographic Information Council and got endorsement and acceptance. Just quickly, for those of you who haven't seen these, it talks to positional accuracy, coordinate system definitions, documentation. The suggestions how to do this, these are mostly standards. Standards usually don't necessarily tell you how they want. They say, here's the results you need to get, but not necessarily how you get them. This crosses over both ways because it does give some recommendations for conduct of survey to do these. Things like documentation. It goes beyond metadata. It tries to suggest, here's a complete bit of survey documentation or GIS documentation for projects. So if you download that, 30-some pages, again, I think it's very useful reading. Any of you, I don't know if any of you had experience with trying to get state legislation passed, and maybe it's different in other states, but Arizona, I see some heads nodding. Arizona, it's a tough thing to do because you're always going against some entrenched industry. In 1983, I was on a committee to just reword the coordinate system definitions, to update them to the NAD 83 datum. We also threw in the international foot at that time. That's the one thing I would take back on that whole effort. But going through this was the better part of a year for this. There were various people that were concerned if we change the standards or the statutes relating to coordinate system, that all the properties were going to move. A few people thought physically, so I think the only saving thing was there was at the time, I can't remember his name, a pilot on the committee that vetted this for the legislature and brought some sanity to it. But I think otherwise it might have just dropped out of sight. It's tough to do on your own, I guess is what I'm saying. We didn't have a lobbyist, we just had almost full-time volunteers. However, teaming with AGIC who represents now the major agencies throughout the state, it's something like I shouldn't say, but I think a 30-member sort of board. It's a fairly powerful political body as well as technical body. They helped us, we helped them to input on what became Senate Bill 1318. And I don't know what the statute became because it was passed and became law last year. It put the Arizona Geographic Information Council as a permanent body recognized by legislature, but it did two other kind of important things. It recognized APLS as the standing geospatial organization for the state. And then they brought in here, coordinate the development and maintenance of a geospatial public land survey system and cadastral database with responsible federal, state, and local agencies. This is not to suggest this is where the cadastre lives at all, but the importance of including geospatial and surveying professionals together to somehow work towards more responsible sharing of the cadastre or parcel records across the state. So this is important. It puts surveyors and geospatial professionals working together at a state legislative level to participate on a lot of things. I forget some of these. This is a several page sort of thing. It certainly puts the Arizona State cartographer, Gene Trobia, in a more responsible position over all of this, which is a good thing. But this, again, just represents collaborative efforts with APLS. We had several committee meetings on this, and some of them were mostly APLS members giving